And you know what? I did not do the sharing my sound. So I'm going to do that again.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. Yep. Okay. So I'm caught off guard because I've never in my life had a cup of coffee. And
Oh my.
can't imagine life with coffee the
I
way
can't
they
even imagine that.
So, thank you all so much. I am very pleased to be here. And of course, the little button that I usually use to share my slideshow isn't where I want it to be. So, I'll go here. I am Sharon Custer, and I wear a lot of different hats in my professional role. Full time, I am at Miami University and our school based Center of Excellence for Prevention and Early Intervention, which is one of the longest titles ever. But I also do a lot of independent consulting with multi-system youth and teams, which is what my primary role as a hub member is. But I wanted to share a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with around trauma responses, not just in school, certainly working with families, but around school age youth. And prior to my work at Miami, I was the director of a wraparound program in Butler County. And so the youth and the work that you're doing is where a big part of my career has been. And oftentimes, we would hear from team members, from family members, from the youth themselves about how frustrated they would be about certain behaviors, whether that was aggression, lying. That's one of my ones, especially like just triggers me. I can handle a lot of things, but don't lie to me. Or manipulation, or however you want to look at it. And over the years, the more we recognize the importance of reframing what these behaviors were actually telling us. And instead of focusing on what they were doing, the why behind it, it really made a difference in the interventions that we were able to do for the youth. So I'm going to share just a little bit about some of those details today. So when we think about trauma, it's really important to recognize that this is going to look different for every single person, and every single person within every family is going to respond differently, potentially to the same traumatic experience. And so SAMHSA looks at three different E's when it comes to trauma. The first is what event happened. And that could be a disaster. I don't know about you, but it feels like tornado sirens are going off more than ever these days in Ohio. It could be we have more refugee populations and wartime. It could be violence in the home, drugs and alcohol in the home, bullying, abuse, all of these different components. It could be one event, it could be multiple events. And then the experience is the perception of the person. And this is going to vary based on their age, where they are with their brain development, past experiences in these situations, the resilience that they have, the connections of caring adults and other young people or other people to, um, you know, provide those protective factors to process those things. It also is about how we label it ourselves. Like, is this a why me situation? Is this a guilt or a shame that I deserve this, or it's my fault that this happened to me again because I didn't set good limits? So all of these things go into how we interpret the event. And then ultimately that impacts how it affects us. And one of the things that I've often see happen is we make this assumption that if kids are really little, they don't remember it, so it's going to be okay. And we've learned through research that that's not necessarily the case. If it's happening during those formative years when the brain is learning to develop trust and attachment, that certainly can impact us down the road. I've seen it a lot with young people with sexual abuse, that if they are abused early in life, we might not see some of those effects until they hit puberty or until they decide that they want to start seeking those sexual relationships. And then all of a sudden we find out, wait, you were abused 10 years ago and no one, you didn't talk about it then. So just we don't want to make assumptions that just because they're not acting out now doesn't mean they won't later, or that what they're doing now might have something from the past. And I'm sure you can all think of situations where you've been triggered by a memory. You're like, whoa, I haven't thought about that person or that thing for a long time. If anyone's ever been in a car accident and you're like, okay, I don't really think about that every day, but when you drive by that intersection where that happened, all of those memories come back. So it's really important that we also recognize the impacts of those triggering behaviors. And they can happen in so many different ways and so many different times. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the hand brain. I'd actually love that in the chat. Just from a curiosity's perspective, if you can do me a favor, if you've never ever heard of the hand brain, put a 0. If you've heard of it, but you're not 100% sure, you couldn't really describe it, put a 1. And if you use it all the time, put a 2. This is just something that we've been thinking about at our center, of how we make assumptions sometimes just because we've heard about it. Everybody has. So I'm not going to look at the chat now. I'll look at that after the fact to kind of see where we are. But even if you've seen this 100 times, because I have, Mary Vicario is one of my favorite trainers and a dear colleague and friend. I learn something new every single time I watch her describe the hand brain. But what I want you to think about when we show this video isn't just what you get from the hand brain model. It's also about thinking about how do you use this and explain it to the families and the youth that you serve. My daughter has lived experience with some profound mental health needs and some trauma. And when she's about 12 or 13, I explained the hand brain to her using layman's terms. And you could just see the light bulbs go off. Like, this is why because she hates acting crazy. Those are her words, not mine. She hates feeling out of control. Um, and so when I was able to say, well, you're offline, it's not your fault, that made sense to her. So now she's in college, she's doing really well, but every once in a while she'll have her moments and I'll say, honey, you're offline. Like, how can I help you get back online? And so I think sometimes we take this knowledge and we just assume that it's for us to use with our clients, but giving them the power and understanding can be really helpful. So think about that as we're watching this together. What words could you use to highlight that with them?
Wonderful thoughts and all those wonderful things we've and it's been my joy to be a part of the Resilience Project for the last 5 years. Today, I get to talk to you about the hand brain. And I love it so much because it allows me to bring a model of the brain with me wherever I go. And I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands. So it's just a win-win all around for me. Feel free to do this with me. Between your wrist and your elbow is your spinal column and something really important called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve actually releases all of our feelings into every organ of our body. So literally, we feel our feelings in every organ of our body. And we don't get to decide when that happens. It just does it. So, in fact, those feelings are the feelings that frequently drive our behavior, especially if it's something we do very quickly, or if it's something that gets us in trouble, or the things that bring the people we serve to us for help often come from those feelings they get in their body, not in those thoughts that we're so proud of, but in these feelings. The next part of our brain is the brain stem. It's the palm of our hand, and it's in charge of all the things we don't think about, all the things that keep our body going that we don't think about. For example, breathing, digestion, bladder and bowel control, which means that's not under your conscious control sometimes. Arousal, the type of arousal that hopefully has you awake right now while you're watching this video, and the type of arousal that makes you want to do things far more interesting than watch this video. It's also in charge of how much information enters your brain. And if you're on the autistic spectrum or you have trauma, it actually lets in extra information because it doesn't know what you're going to need to be safe. And that extra information can become very overwhelming very quickly. In fact, it makes all your senses stronger, so things are brighter and louder and they feel weird in your mouth and your clothes feel weird and get very stressful. And the other reason it can get very stressful is that all the information that enters our brain goes immediately to our fear center, which is the next part of our hand brain, which is our thumb. The fear center, also known as the limbic system, is in charge of 3 very important things that I like to remember through the word FAR. It's in charge of felt safety, attachment, and regulation. And it likes things to happen in that order, in fact. So when the information comes into the brain, it immediately goes to the fear center and decides safe or not safe. And if it's not safe, it keeps our thinking brain offline. But if it is safe, it lets the next part of our brain, our cortexes, our thinking brain, come online and give it a hug. But when it's not safe, throws it offline. So when you're not feeling safe, it doesn't allow you to attach and work cooperatively with others. And when you can't attach and work cooperatively with others, it also doesn't allow you to regulate. And you can look like you're out of control. And it might look like a choice, but when your fear center's in charge, it's not a choice, because what it has thrown offline is your thinking brain, which wraps around the fear center and has all those wonderful thoughts and all those wonderful things we've practiced doing housed in it. But when the fear center gets afraid, throws it right offline. And the only part of our brain we have conscious control over is our thinking brain. So when our fear center throws it offline, all of those thoughts we're so proud of and that we've worked so hard on to help us control our behavior, they are out of our reach. And if the fear center can't tell, should I be afraid or not afraid, it always errs on the side of fear to keep you alive. So we want to find a way to get a message from the thinking brain to the fear center so they can work together when we're afraid. And we're going to look at how to do that. So our vagus nerve and our brainstem think in sensations and feelings. Our fear center, our limbic system, thinks in feelings and pictures. And our thinking brain thinks in pictures and words. So you may have guessed it, the passport from the fear center to the thinking brain are the pictures. When we can create a picture for what we want, we have a better chance of getting a message to that thinking brain, bringing it back online so it can hug our fear center and help us feel safe again. Hi, I'm Mary Vicario.
Oh, come on. Advance. There we go. There we go. All right. So for me, I often think of it like that's a lot of clinical, and I never remember, right? So I think of thinking brain and feeling brain. With younger children, I sometimes say upstairs brain and downstairs brain. But the goal to me is to help them understand the importance of the connection. You want your thinking brain and your feeling brain to stay together. So when you're having big feelings, your thinking brain can say, "You've got this, you can do this." The other part that I think is really important when we're talking with young people about their behaviors is sometimes that thinking brain goes offline like this, and sometimes it goes like this. And so when I hear from different team members or family members that say like 0 to 100, or they just go off for no reason, I have to remind them that there's always a reason. It's just that their thinking brain went offline sometimes so fast, or we don't always know what those triggers are. And it does help, again, reframe what's happening with that young person so that we can create those interventions. Another way that Finding Hope and Mary and her team have really encapsulated what the research is about is really shifting the words that we use and the perceptions that we have. So years ago, it felt like everyone was saying we're trauma informed. And then they said, no, we're trauma responsive. Informed means we get it, but responsive means we're doing something about it. And then it shifted. It felt like you're aware, and then you're sensitive. And so to me, it doesn't really matter what we call it. The most important thing is that we're using universal precautions with everyone. So just like with traditional first aid, you assume that everyone could have a bloodborne pathogen and everyone could be contagious. I encourage everyone to say, you should assume that everyone has trauma. It's not like a prescription where if you give it to the wrong person, it could do damage. If we're trauma responsive with everything that we do, it's only going to help everyone around us. So that would be the one component of this. The other part of this is thinking about shifting the way we talk from what's wrong with you, and looking at like, what, like, why could you do this? And shifting that to, a lot of times you'll hear Bruce Perry in particular talk about what happened to you. And then taking it another step further, and what did you do to survive? And it was perfect as I was working on this yesterday. One of my former students is an elementary school teacher, and she posted on social media, she said something like, "This is my love letter this week." And it was a student who wrote F you all over their math project. And the first comments were like, "Oh my gosh, what a brat," or "that kid," and all these people. And I flipped it. And I said, "Wow, how ironic. I'm working on this. I wonder what happened to this young person that they feel the need to respond to you this way. I wonder what they're feeling that's making them so upset that they need to lash out." And she replied back, put a heart, and then deleted the post. Because she recognized that she wasn't handling it well. And so when we look at this as what did you do to feel safe, as Mary talks about, or what did you do to survive, again, you can see that these behaviors have been coping for them for a while, or helping them cope and helping them feel survival, right? So the other thing that I think often happens when we're working with families is we create these interventions on what is the behavior that we see. So for instance, if you are working with someone who runs out of the classroom or runs away from home regularly, oftentimes maybe the interventions will be things like we'll position them in a different spot in the classroom so it's harder for them to get out, or we'll create tape on the floor so that they can only pace or leave, stay in this spot. We might put some sensory activities, or sometimes I've even seen schools put a treadmill. One of the schools that I work with has a code that there's a cantaloupe in the building, which is an eloper. And so they'll be like, cantaloupe, cantaloupe. And then they'll say fruit in the basket when they're caught, just so they're not bringing attention to what is really going on. But what if we switched it? What if we, instead of saying, let's focus on how do we stop this young person from running, and we focus on why are they running? The interventions are going to look totally different. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore the what. I don't want to say that we just say, oh, they've had trauma, like it's okay. Like it's still important that we're recognizing that we have acceptable and unacceptable behaviors in home and society. But what if the youth talked about how unsafe they feel, whether that's they feel picked on, whether it's they feel stupid, and when they feel stupid, and again, these are their words. I want to hurt myself, or I just don't want to be here. And so if I run away, I don't have to think about how bad that makes me feel. Now your interventions are going to be about how do we help you feel connected? How do we help you feel safe? How do we help you regulate so that you don't go offline when you start to feel anxious that you don't know how to do that math problem? You still might do some of those other interventions for the what as a precautionary, but you might engage more sensory activities for regulation. You might do more accommodations with tech support. You might say, let's take more breaks for regularly. Let's come up with a code word so that when you're starting to feel insecure, you can let me know, and I'll, as a teacher or the aide, I'll come and give you some one-on-one. Hopefully you're kind of sensing like how different this could look and how easy this can even be in some cases. So depending on which website you look at and which researcher is out there, there's a lot of different trauma responses out there. And some say there's 3, some say there's 5, some say there's 7. I kind of lump them all together. Most of you have probably heard of the fight or flight responses, where if you are feeling like you're threatened and you feel unsafe, you might need to fight back, or you might need to run away. But there are a few others. And it's also important to recognize that some of these can be positive. If I'm having a dispute with my spouse, for instance, it might be better for both of us. I'm like, let's take a break and walk away. That's flight, right? But there are other times where running away is not appropriate. We're seeing young people flock and friend. For some cases, going to people who are good supports and positive is really, really helpful and gets them through. But in other cases, if they're flocking to negative resources, whether that's gang related or we see a lot of young people connect with hypersexual behaviors because they want to feel an attachment to someone. And so they're engaging in unsafe practices that way. So it's not always positive and or negative. It could be both and or. That didn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. I'm looking at the clock and I'm looking at Mike going, I got to get on this or he's going to cut me off. The freeze, faint, and flop, I feel like are hard to sometimes differentiate what those are as separate, but essentially freeze is when you just kind of just stop, you go tense, you're silent, you're just like, I'm just, you're not, the faint is more I give in and you just kind of go limp. But a lot of people sometimes look at this as sometimes even dissociating. And dissociating does not mean you have dissociative identity disorder. Dissociating means I'm just going to daydream or block this out because the idea of taking it all in is not going to be good for either of us. And so if I can let go of that and not be present for what's happening, then I can survive these kinds of things. And so that's why you sometimes see students just tune out completely in classrooms, or when their parents start to say something, they just shut down because that is their way of surviving those situations. So I was trying to think of some examples of cases, and I was in a little slap happy mood yesterday, going on lack of sleep and writing grants. And I, for whatever reason, it popped into my head thinking about the Marvels and Wanda, who I just find to be a very intriguing character. If you're not familiar with the storyline, but she's experienced a significant amount of trauma in her life. Her parents were killed. Her experiments were put on her to get these magical superpowers. She's just had lots and lots of trauma and loss in her life. And Disney did a little mini series just on her where she basically just kidnaps the whole town and puts them under her power because she wants to have a town that's just for her and about her. And she feels like she can have this fake reality so she doesn't have to think about what her life really is like. And that just really resonated with me, that we can sort of say like, wow, okay, the superhero can do this and we can kind of overlook it. But why can't we do that with the young people that we work with? A lot of them have had pretty horrific lives in a very short period of time. And they sometimes need to create that alternative reality, whether that's lying or manipulating. And again, the words that we often use in our case notes. But what they're really trying to do is just say, you know, I've got to have this false narrative, because if I have to think about how bad my life is every day, I'm not going to be able to survive it. And the other quote that I thought was really interesting from one of the movies was, I don't know how I did it. I just remember feeling completely alone and empty and endless nothingness. And if that doesn't resonate to the hopelessness and the grief that a lot of the young people we work with feel, I don't know what does, especially some of the cases we've had lately. So with Wanda, rather than saying, hey, how about we, work on interventions to let all these townspeople go and not be hostages, I would work on goals with her around how do we help you feel safe? How do we help you feel connected again? So in sum, I just wanted to kind of highlight that a lot of the behaviors we're seeing, whether they go from 0 to 100 or 0, 10, 20 to 100, really connect back to your fear center that Mary talked about, right? If you don't feel safe, you are not going to be able to connect. You are not going to be able to make healthy decisions. You're not going to make rational decisions. You're going to do whatever it takes to feel safe. And so whether that's screaming or lying or hoarding or running away, it all is going to tie back to one of these feeling safe connections. So when our teams are sometimes asking, like, what is the functional behavior behind this, or why are they doing this? Young people aren't going to be able to say, oh, I'm doing it to feel safe. But as a team, we hope that maybe you can restructure some of the questions that you're asking to help them connect back to some of these key concepts and create the interventions around that. So I believe you get all these slides at the end. So I put some extra resources for you at the end if you need more information. And you are also always welcome to connect with me if that would be helpful.